Welcome back to the Training Babble podcast. I'm your host, Dave Schell, and today I'm joined by Hunter Allen, a man who needs no introduction. If you've been riding bikes for any amount of time and have had a power meter or read about power, you should be familiar with him. He's the co-author of Training and Racing with Power Meter, but more recently, he is the author of Continuous Glucose Monitor for athletes, training and competing with a continuous glucose monitor, actually. So, Hunter, thanks for being here.
Oh, Dave, it's great to be here, man. Great to see you again. And man, this is awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this. As I just mentioned in the intro here, you are probably best known for writing like the book on training with a power meter. And so when did that first come out? Was that like 99, 90?
No, it wasn't that long ago.
Really?
But the 2006 was the first edition. So
2006. Okay.
Yeah, 2006. Okay. Yeah. So we started on the journey in 99, and then birthed Cycling Peak software in 2003. So, and then 2006 was, Dr. Cog and Andy and I, we got tired of answering the same emails over and over. And we're like, man, let's just write a book. Let's like get it out of here. People will stop emailing us.
Yeah. And the reason I bring that up is I think, like I said, that's probably what you're most known for. Right. And with Power Meter, it's very objective. It's a very kind of binary. We say a watt is a watt, right? And so I'm curious how you found yourself getting involved with the continuous glucose monitor. Mm-hmm. And from my experience so far, just in playing with it and stuff like that, it can vary widely from day to day. And so I want to hear about that experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that, getting a CGM, Bobby Julick, good friend of mine who I've known forever, he was working for the Super Sapiens company, which unfortunately is not in business anymore. But he was like, man, you got to get one of these things. I'm working for him. I got to send you a bunch of sensors and let's just try it and see what you think. Maybe there's something here, maybe there's not. And so he sent me some sensors and a real similar path to the power meter. Like, okay, what does this mean? Like, what does this data mean? I don't understand it. There's a bunch of squiggly lines here, et cetera. Yeah. So just putting a CGM on and going out and riding, working out, living life, and starting to see kind of what's happening with my own personal body responses first to then, okay, now can I get these on other athletes and see if they have similar responses? Can I learn what's going on? And then just started deep diving into this, like talking to researchers and scientists and reading everything I possibly could find out about what is this, deep understanding of glucose and how this glucose works within the body and insulin and how that relates and how all these things factor into performance.
Right.
And so that was just, big deep dive.
Yeah. And so in the book, you talked about you essentially spent over 2 years and kind of experimented with your own athletes. Yeah. And you've mentioned that it varies from athlete to athlete, and it can even vary with the same athlete from day to day. And so I'm curious, I guess I'll take a step back because you've been coaching way longer than I have, but I've been coaching for a while, and we see all these devices come on the market and we get really excited about them. And then most of them kind of fizzle out, right? Like a lot of them just don't hold water. And so we don't want to implement it unless there's actionable data or information we can use. And so with this, like what were some of your biggest surprises as you started to experiment with your athletes and see some of these patterns?
Yeah. And really important point that I want everybody to, I'm just going to reiterate what you said there, Dave, is the fact that it is not this wattage thing, right? It's not 200 watts, it's 200 watts, whether you're going uphill, you're going downhill, you're in the rain, it's the winter, you're on your trainer or whatever. It's not the same. And that makes it challenging. It makes it really challenging to understand what are the responses? Because what you have for breakfast may be different than what you had yesterday. When you ate dinner the night before could impact your glucose the day of or in your workout. I mean, it just really it can be highly variable. And so that is definitely the challenge with really trying to understand what this information means. And so, you know, the what I try to do and have been trying and still I'm working on this is give everybody at least a snapshot of like what does it mean when it's when it has this big spike up and down, or what does it mean when it slowly goes up or it slowly comes down. So I think that's been if like everybody has probably 10 different types of responses. When they respond that way, they may be different times.
Right.
So that was one of my big takeaways was that, I think kind of like that not only is this really variable, but then two, from an athletic standpoint, was this sounds so crazy, right? But it's so true. And I see it so many times with athletes is that most of us are actually kind of creating the bonk. Most of us are creating these hypoglycemic crashes.
Right.
And we don't necessarily think of it like that. And so, let me give you an example. So what happens is you're going out, you're working out, you're riding your bike, and let's say your glucose is, and to give people a perspective, like a normal kind of daily just chugging along glucose, you're sitting here at your office desk or whatever, it could be 90 to 110 or 115 or whatever, depending on when you eat and stuff, but just kind of that daily like chugging along rate. So let's say, for example, you're out riding, you have your glucose up at 120, 100, or let's say 130, and then 130 milligrams per deciliter is how it's measured. And then, you don't really eat. And then that glucose just starts coming down. And then all of a sudden you get down to 90 and you're like, whoa, man, I'm bonking. Holy crap. How did that happen? It just like happened just like this. Right. But in reality, it's like it's been doing that for 2 hours.
Right.
And then what do? You jam like 8 Cliff Blocks in your mouth and 2 gels, and now your glucose goes to 200. And then what happens is the body, your pancreas releases insulin. It tells the body, tells the cells, okay, open up. We can suck in all this glucose into our cells. And then that glucose comes, bam, it comes down. Plus you're exercising, so you're using it. So you kind of have the double whammy at one time. And so you came to 90 first, it goes to 200, and now it crashes down to like 60 or 70. And so that is what we call a reactive hypoglycemic crash, when it actually ends up lower than it was when you started kind of feeling the bonk.
Yeah.
And now you're really panicky and you're like, oh God, right? I just need to eat more food, right? And that's really what most athletes want. They don't realize like, oh man, I had too much and I had it too quickly. And then that's what created this massive spike and then the crash. And then they just think, oh, I need to eat more, right? And then they do it again.
Yeah.
Then they then create this roller coaster of high glucose and then crashes and high glucose and crashes. So that was a really big revelation. And for a lot of the athletes that I spent the last 2 years working with, the same kind of thing happened. They didn't really understand that they were making that situation occur.
And so it's interesting because I've experienced something a few times last year, and it always seems to happen on the trainer, but it's this thing where it's like I eat something 30 to 45 minutes before I get on the trainer, and then I get on the trainer. It's a super easy ride. And then all of a sudden I'm like, it feels really hard. I've got a pit in my stomach. I'm like sweating. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I can't produce any power. And so like wearing the CGM for a while, just seeing those spikes and seeing how quickly the body responds to those sorts of things. And so it's like with that, it's like we're trying to manage that steady drip of glucose into our system. Yeah. And you talk about in the book kind of like fast, slow, and medium responders, and really tailoring our pre-workout sugar
Right.
based on how quickly you respond to that. And so, can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great example, and so everybody responds differently, and I've kind of categorized them, and the science world hasn't. I haven't created this. This is the science kind of the insulin world, glucose world's created these fast, medium, and slow responders, and what that means is based on how you take in. Let's say I'm going to take in one gel, or let's say I'm going to take in two gels. How quickly does that make my blood glucose go up? And then how quickly does it come back down again? So a fast responder their glucose could go up within 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden within 15 minutes, boom, their glucose is now at 180, really high. And then in general, most of us our pancreases work really well. So they're putting out insulin and you're using some of this as well. And so then the glucose comes down really quickly. And so you have kind of that feeling you're having, right? That all of a sudden it's like, oh, why is my glucose low? Why am I feeling bonky? So you might fit in that fast responder category. A medium responder, their glucose goes up at a more slow rate. So instead of 15 minutes or so, it may take 20 to 30 or maybe 35 minutes for their glucose to come up and peak. And then it may also taper off at a slower rate too. A slow responder, they may take into gels and it may not even hardly go up much in 40 minutes. It may just slowly come up. They may need 3 gels to get it to come up even faster and get more of a peak because they just need more glucose. Their body doesn't respond quite as fast. And then that slow responder actually may end up being at a very pretty stable level. Maybe, for example, they go from 110 and those 2 gels, that brings them up to 120 and they stay there for a while and they just kind of taper off. Versus the medium responder goes to 140 and then comes back down. The fast responder goes to 160 and then comes back down. So understanding which responder you are, that helps with your timing of when you want to have some food before your workout, and then also what we call the glycemic load. So how much, right? It's like, oh, okay, do I take 1 gel? Do I take 2 gels? Do I take 3 gels? So how much do you need?
Yeah, and so you kind of describe a process for that, and just kind of experimenting and collecting data, just like the power meter again, right? Like for the first few weeks, it's like just ignore the data, we're just observing. But yeah, eating a bunch of shit and then seeing like how does it affect you? How quickly does it spike? How quickly does it come down? What happens? Like I'm notorious, and I hope my athletes aren't listening, but I love a pint of Ben and Jerry's right before bed, right? And like seeing how that impacts my glucose overnight.
Yeah, you go to bed and your glucose is 200. You're like, why can't I go to sleep?
Yeah, exactly. So you recommend, and I guess a side note here, I'm curious with the different meters. So like you had mentioned Super Sapiens, you would recommend Stilo for me, and that's the one that I got. And I know there's a few others out there too. Are the meters essentially the same?
Right. Great question. They're not. So there are non-prescription ones and there are prescription ones. The community basically, the companies have come out with these. The prescription ones were only made for diabetics, type 1 and type 2 diabetics. And so only since they've been approved for non-diabetics have we even had access to them. The prescription ones are plus or minus 10 milligrams per deciliter in terms of accuracy. The non-prescription ones are plus or minus 20. Okay. Now 20 is a big number. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a big number. And similar to power meters, right? We're measuring it in a place what's called the interstitial fluid. So the interstitial space is kind of, and we put it on the back of our arm here. And usually that's a good place because you need a little bit of fat right there. And it's just kind of the space between the outer layer of your skin and your muscle. And this interstitial space is where this little filament goes. And basically it's so crazy, right? It's like very similar to a strain gauge and a power meter, but
Yeah.
but it gets an electrical signal, but it's doing it through a chemical reaction with the glucose and the glucose oxidase that creates an electrical signal, and then that goes into the little sensor, and that converts it into how many milligrams per deciliter your glucose is. But that's different than pricking your finger, right? And that's different than looking at the blood intravenously if you tapped right a vein, right? Tapping the vein, that's like measuring your power at your pedals, right?
Right.
Measuring at the finger, that's like measuring in the crank arm. Measuring at the interstitial fluid, that's like the old power tap hub
Exactly.
or your smart trainer, right? Back after the drivetrain, right? So there's some loss at the drivetrain. We know it's 7 to 10 watts, and similar in this way, it's going to be a different number. So when we look at these different sensors, it's really important when you buy one of these CGMs, you also spend the extra $40 and get a glucometer. So, you can get these things. They're super cheap on Amazon, $40, get the test strips that come with them, the finger pricker, the little lancets, all that stuff. They're super easy to do. And basically what you do is you need to make sure that after an hour or two of inserting it, check your glucose, see how different it is on the finger prick versus your CGM. And then maybe 24 hours, you do the same thing again. And then maybe a couple of days later, you might want to do it again and get a feel for where is it. And some of these things are wildly off and they're not accurate. Like just for example, this week I put my new one on and it was really low. It was like, wow, I'm really low. This is crazy. This does not make sense. Boom, I pricked my finger. The thing was 60 milligrams per deciliter low. I was like, okay, this thing is saying that I'm 100, but I just had a ton of carbs. There's no freaking way I'm 100 right now.
And so that's within the same brand.
Within the same brand. That was a Stello, and so that was within the same brand. So I immediately just ripped it off. You go on their little chat bot on their website and you say, hey, this thing's inaccurate. Here's what it was. You give them the serial number. So make sure you save the box. You need to save your box if you got it, or just the end of the box with a serial number on it. I take the end of the box. I even write down the date on when I installed it, and then that way I've got it in case it goes bad before the 2 weeks is over. And then they'll send you a new one. In general, here's kind of what I've found, and this is with the non-prescription and the prescription ones. In general, I've found that they're very accurate between in a range, and that range usually is between 60 milligrams per deciliter up to about 110, 115, sometimes 120. But in that range, they're really close to what your finger stick is going to say. When you get over about 120, then all of a sudden it starts to diverge, and again, these are just, I've only worked with like probably 50 athletes, so this is not like a scientific study, but I've seen in most cases that the CGM will be 20 milligrams per deciliter high versus the finger stick. So if it's saying 160 and you finger stick, it's probably going to be 140. Okay. And so that's still within the parameters of measurement. They're plus and minus. And as long as you know that, that's fine, and it's consistently like that. Again, the prescription ones are going to be plus or minus 10, and the same thing I found as well is like, the prescription ones will be 10 high at the higher numbers, and they'd be just dead on, kind of in that narrow range, smaller range.
Okay, and then is it also? I think I'd read that like getting in the shower, the warm water can mess with it a little bit, like the filament, and so I've maybe position like sleeping thing. So are there other things that can impact the readings as well?
Absolutely. So any change in temperature, there's a small temperature change sensor in there. So if you go, inside and then you go outside and it's super cold outside and your arm gets really cold quickly, or you jump in a hot shower, then the reading is going to be whack for a little bit before. So don't get freaked out. Like, what happened, man? Every time I get in the shower, my glucose goes to 200. I should take showers. Right. No, it's not that. So that's part of it. And then, of course, you can roll over on it. So it's got a little Bluetooth sensor in there. So if you roll over it when you sleep, you may suppress the signal so it doesn't get to your phone, so you lose some data that way. But usually, these things all store it. So they'll store the data up to 8 hours. Now they down, kind of. Oh, what's the word?
Like the fidelity might be a little bit less.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a fidelity. Exactly. Thank you. And so that's part of it, but that's fine. Not a big deal. So, and of course, you got to keep your phone within within Bluetooth range, which heck, all of us are doing this anyway now.
yeah, exactly. Right. Be a stretch not to be within range, right?
Right.
So, what would be your recommendations? I mean, they're not very expensive. Like when you suggested I pick a couple up, I was surprised by how affordable they were. I mean, it was like $50 per meter, and they each last 2 weeks, which is great. So, do you have a recommendation in terms of, is this something that athletes would use all the time, or is it something where you do it at first, like for a month or so, and then periodically to like spot check?
Great question. I think you need 6 months of data to start. So I think you should do it for 6 months because that gives you enough life experiences to understand really, truly what's going on, right? You're going to get sick. You're going to be stressed at work. You're going to have a rest week. You're going to have a crazy hard training week. You're going to go on vacation, right? You're going to have a week where you blow out the food at Thanksgiving. There's going to be enough life experiences in 6 months that it's going to give you a real true understanding of like, okay, cool, what's happening in this case. Travel is crazy. And type 1 and type 2 diabetics have known this forever. And I've asked quite a few of them, I'm like, what do you do with your glucose when you travel? They're like, sucks. It's horrible. I can't control my glucose when I travel. My biorhythm's off. I just every type 1, and type 2 as well, definitely mainly type 1s, but they have really big trouble with changing of time zones. And so it's a huge problem. They're not controlling their food, and they have different food when they're eating, blah, blah. Anyway, so travel is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Right? Go and see what happens because it's going to be wild. So once you've used it for 6 months, then, you should have a really good understanding of kind of what are the glucose responses, to different sports nutrition, your different foods that you're eating, pizza, veggies, all of the fruits, all these things, right? You need to kind of understand this stuff before training, after training, you've got a good feel. After that, then I think that using them periodically during a couple of scenarios. Number one, during heavy training periods. Okay, so wow, I'm really pushing here for the next 4 to 6 weeks. This is going to be my final push to my final build, when then I'm going to rest and have my peak. That's a great time to have it, because that's going to tell you, are you replenishing enough glycogen, right? Are you getting those glycogen stores full enough? Are you eating enough carbs? Then the other scenario is if you're not doing a UCI race, since the UCI's banned these things, if you're not doing a UCI race, use it during your peak race. Okay. Yeah. So again, like, oh, wow, cool. I've got 3 weekends in a row that I'm racing, then you should totally use one, because you can see exactly what's going on, prevent any kind of problems before they occur, keep your glucose in a really good place, and then also enhance your recovery too, because there's certain, you want to see what's going on in your recovery. Did I get the big glucose spike with my recovery shake, or is my baseline dropping down because I'm too fatigued, et cetera? It's so many different things you can learn.
Yeah. So let's talk. You had already mentioned the role of insulin a little bit. So let's go back to that and just talk about the role of insulin and how that impacts our blood glucose and what we're seeing in that squiggly line.
Right, sure, sure. Insulin is fascinating. It's produced by your pancreas, by the beta cells in your pancreas, and there are specialized cells there that produce insulin, and it does so many things. Like, it is fascinating when you dig into the science of this. From our perspective, as you know, understanding as an athlete and coaches, you know, what we need to know is how what it does in terms of when you eat and what we take in. So basically, you can think of the muscle cell. You know, it's a little ball, right? And you have a door that opens the muscle cell. Insulin is the key that opens the muscle cell. Basically, there's a receptor there that the insulin goes into, and when that receptor goes in and fills that hole, then what happens is these things called GLUT4 transporters come up and they pierce the cell membrane, open up and say, we're open for business. And then your glucose, proteins, nutrients all can come in the cell. Okay, so this happens all the time. But insulin is a big driver of these GLUT4, basically to open up these doorways to open up. And so that's what we do. So when we eat, anytime we're taking in carbohydrates, then insulin is released. That then the glucose then is circulating through our blood, and then it then gets sucked in by our liver, gets what's called the first pass. It gets the first chance at getting as much glucose as it can to
Oh,
store.
interesting.
It stores it first. It says, okay, I want, you know, I need as much as I can pack in. So we get about 30 minutes of stored glycogen. All right, glucose, glycogen is our stored form of glucose. So it packs it in. When it is full, then it says, okay, let's send it out. And then we'll send it out. And that way it can go now into the muscles. The muscles then soak it up. Right, your muscles are a sink; they soak up all the glucose, and so that's what you want. And then there's going to be left over, right? It's just circulating in your bloodstream, which is great because it helps power cells. It does all kind of goes where it needs to go, you know, because all of these other things need glucose too. So that's the main role of insulin. Now, you know, insulin is how it's produced, or when it's produced, how it's produced is super complicated, because a lot of times when we do hard exercise, insulin is basically turned off. So all of a sudden, basically, you know, we start. Let's say, for example, you start a hard criterium right from the gun. That insulin, your pancreas stops producing insulin. You know, the muscle cells will release glucose will turn glycogen into glucose. And the same thing with the liver, it will turn glycogen into glucose because you need it right then and there. And you don't need any insulin right now. We need maximum glucose to be output so we can be using it. Other times, like let's say you do a 5-hour race, you're gonna go out and like maybe you're producing insulin. You take in a bunch of food, your body releases insulin. It starts storing, replenishing. It starts using it. It starts replenishing those stores, and that's normal. But then there's a really hard section where you got to drill it for 30 minutes. This is the make or break point, right? Then all of a sudden now that insulin production is shut off. It's not storing anymore. It's now releasing it back into the bloodstream so you can use it. So it's there's so many, and that is super simplified.
Right. Yeah.
There are lots of other different things going on, but at the same time, that's a really good one. And think about like our recovery piece, right? So what we want when we recover is, one, we've depleted the glycogen out of our liver, out of our muscles. You know, if we've gone hard for 2.5 hours or more, okay, you go for an hour, hour and a half, you're going to deplete some, but you're still going to have a bunch, right? I mean, you're a trained athlete. We've got about 2.5 hours, 2 hours in the muscles, 30 minutes in the liver, stored. So you really need to go longer than that. Then at the end, okay, my glucose is low. I'm going to do a recovery shake. I want carbs, I want proteins in that recovery shake. That then stimulates the pancreas to release insulin. That insulin says, oh, wow, cool, look at all this glucose. We're going to suck this into these cells and repair damage and help us to recover so we have full glycogen stores the next day. So that's really important. So your post-race recovery shake, it should be a big old spike.
Yeah.
And that's what you want.
Yeah. And so just to kind of go back to this, like we're really talking about like 3 periods here. Is like before the workout, we're wanting a spike.
Yep.
During the workout, we're kind of wanting a steady stream and to avoid the peaks and valleys.
Yep.
And then post-workout, wanting another big spike to replenish.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Really well said. Yeah, really well said. Yep.
And so outside of the workout, how can athletes use this? I know one thing you mentioned is kind of like food stacking, and the order in which you eat your food can impact that insulin spike. Yeah. Or it's not an insulin spike; it's a glucose spike, right?
Right, glucose spike, yeah, and it would be an insulin spike too. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have insulin continuous monitors. Yeah, there's no such thing, and there probably may not be any in the future. It's very difficult, but. What food stacking is think of, your stomach, right, is this big old barrel where you're stacking food in there, right? And so what you want to do, especially if you're going to have a high carbohydrate meal. I know I'm going to have some pasta, I'm going to have it's dinner time, etc. And I know it's going to shoot my glucose up really high, and I don't really want to have a big glucose spike before I go to bed. So the first thing I do is I'm going to have a salad. I'm going to eat a salad, and I'm going to have only vinegar. So vinegar contains acetic acid, and this does a couple of different things. One, it makes the cells more receptive to absorbing glucose. It helps to produce a little more insulin, and so acetic acid is pretty amazing. And acetic acid is also in lemons and limes. So if you go to a restaurant, get your lemon, squeeze it in your water, right? That helps to lower your glucose spike a little bit. But have just vinegar, and then eat your salad first. That's the first thing you're going to stack in there. Then you're going to get your plate, right? And you've got your veggies, you got your proteins, you got your carbs. Just eat all your veggies first, right? Eat them all. Don't touch the protein. Don't touch the carbs. Just eat all the veggies first. Stack that next. That's your fiber, right? So now you got this nice layer of fiber here that's going to slow down the absorption. Then you eat your protein. That stacks on top of that. That helps to further slow down the absorption. Finally, eat your carbs on top. Now it's like, oh, wow, all this other stuff kind of mingles together and absorbs much more slowly into the bloodstream, muting your glucose spike and also keeping it much more stable for a longer period of time. If you did the opposite, and you should try this, right? I mean, everybody should try this, right? Take the same exact meal, but do it the opposite way. So eat all those carbs first, right? Then eat your proteins, then eat your veggies, then eat your salad last, and see what happens to your glucose from that perspective.
And I would imagine this is like even more important. Like I'm thinking about in the morning, like having your breakfast. And if you were, again, we're wanting to we want to avoid that crash. We want to have steady energy through lunch or whatever. And it's like, yeah, if we start with the pancakes and probably setting ourselves up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And I mean, there's some really good research, not just from an athletic standpoint, but also from a longevity standpoint. And even it kind of it primes you for your next meal from an insulin standpoint. When you have carbohydrates and then your body produces some insulin, it kind of holds it in reserve, a little bit in reserve. And so then the next meal, if you have more carbohydrates, then it actually helps to lower your glucose level in the second time that you eat carbohydrates. So having some carbohydrates as breakfast is really good. At the same time, make sure you're having healthy proteins and fats too. I mean, like that is not eggs and bacon, people. All right. Don't get me wrong. All right. I mean, good, healthy proteins and fats. I mean, you're going to put some almond butter, organic almond butter on there, right? You're going to get some protein from that. You're going to do some flax on there as well. You're going to have a nice bowl of muesli. Maybe do it with some soy milk or almond milk that contains protein too in that. That's a great breakfast because one, you're getting good complex carbs, throw a bunch of fruit on there, get some antioxidants, get some proteins, get some fats. Glucose comes up, it's going to stay stable, and then take you all the way until lunchtime.
And so one thing we didn't really talk about, what is the harm? So it's kind of like we have desirable and undesirable glucose spikes. So what is the harm of glucose spikes when we're not exercising?
Right. So this is a tough question because is there a harm really? And I don't think so. This is a really good point. This is a really important point, actually. And so let's back up just a little bit. Your goal when you get a CGM is to not. You're not trying to create a flat line here. Okay. A lot of people will get a CGM and they're like, "Oh my God, this is going crazy. Wow, I can't eat carbs ever again in my life." Right. And so, no, that's not the answer. You're not going to go keto here because you're an athlete. You need carbs, okay? I mean, you could do the keto thing, but it's really hard, and your intensity is going to be really low, right? You're going to be at low zone 2 pretty much the rest of your life. Anyway,
is keto the answer?
Keto is definitely. I hope that's clear in my book. So it's fine to have glucose spikes. Okay, that's okay to have glucose spikes. It's okay to have places where it goes up, but you don't want to have these massive spikes. Like I wouldn't want you to say, okay, gosh, my glucose is trucking along here at 90, and I wake up in the morning and then I spike it to 200, right? And then it comes back down to 90 again. I don't want you to do that because that's a lot of load on the pancreas. You're telling it to produce a lot of insulin. You can kind of burn out these cells, all right? And so that's a thing. It takes a lot of life to do it, 30 or 40 years or so, or maybe a little less, but you don't want to become a type 2 later in your life because your pancreas is not working anymore, right? So we're trying to reduce some of that strain on the pancreas itself. So it's okay to say, okay, gosh, I'm cruising along at 90. I'm bumping my glucose up to 140, and then it comes down to 110, 120, and just kind of putts along here and cruises to lunchtime. Totally fine. And then at lunch, I bump it back up to 130, 140, and it cruises along and kind of gradually comes back down to dinner time. Totally fine to do that. We're trying to minimize the height, the amplitude of the peaks, and that's really what you're aiming for. The harm is really over time. So if this is where being a type 2 diabetic and is challenging, or even a pre-diabetic that has some insulin resistance, it is where that level of glucose may be pretty high for a long period of time. Maybe 160 could last 160 for 5 or 6 or 7 hours, and it just doesn't come down because your cells are resistant to the insulin that you're sending, and it won't actually suck in. It won't suck that glucose in.
Oh, interesting.
So basically, that's insulin resistance. Is like, oh wow, my cells, they won't open up. They won't open up the GLUT4 doorways, and they won't bring in that glucose. And so you have to basically kind of put more insulin all around it and force it to open. That's insulin resistance, and that's not good. Okay, so we don't want that. We want to make sure that, okay, cool. And harm comes when in that situation, basically on the inside walls of your arteries. Okay. This is the biggest one. There's other things that happen too, but this is the biggest one. And so there's a whole group of scientists in this world that believe and have theories all around that, like heart disease, strokes, cancer, these are all caused by high glucose levels and chronic high glucose levels, right? Not like the kind that we have as athletes. And so that's where I think it's really important for athletes to realize we're in a transitory state. Okay, so we're taking glucose, our glucose goes up, and then we're using that glucose, and then we're depleting glycogen stores, and then we're refilling them. So that's a very different thing than, okay, wow, I'm taking all these carbs, and now I'm just sitting on my couch watching TV for the next 4 hours or 6 hours. Right. Totally different kind of a thing. So that's important, an important point.
Yeah, and that reminded me, I wanted to ask you, when we're talking about racing with a glucose monitor, are you able to use that information in real time? Like you had mentioned a 5-hour race, and are you able to watch that glucose fall and be like, oh, I need to like take a gel before I get too far? Or is it more after the fact and looking at like where, oh yeah, I felt like shit here and I probably should have eaten more?
Right. I mean, to me, you need to look at it while you're racing. The downside of this right now is that the only way to look at it is on your phone.
That's what I was curious about. Yeah.
And so that's the problem. So Super Sapiens did a great job, worked with Garmin, and they made it so it was actually a field in your Garmin. Now, I know there's some guys on GitHub who have hacked it, and with the Dexcom G7 sensors, which is a prescription sensor. And so if you search on GitHub, they've got a solution where you can stick it on your Garmin and you can see it on your watch or your Garmin, whatever Garmin you have that has Garmin IQ. They created something for that. We need more of that. Like, we're kind of in the infancy right now in this world where it's like, oh man, what's wrong with these companies? They need to let us be able to send this data to our devices, Wahoo, Garmin, whatever you got, I've kind of gone to this place where I have one of those, I can't remember the name of the company that makes it, but it's kind of like one of these, bikini bra things that you strap on your stem and you pull the corners over your phone and it locks your phone kind of in, or the quad lock is even better.
Yeah.
And so if you're racing, like, and again, I mean, you got to carry your stupid phone, and you're taking your phone kind of anyway. If you're doing like long stuff like Unbound and all this crap, I mean, you're taking it anyhow. So you can see it right on your screen, and that's where you want it, right? You're like, oh man, my glucose was 140, and now it's 130, and now it's 125, and now it's 120. So I'm coming down. I need to do something. I need to eat something. I need to eat a half a bar. I need to put 2 Cliff Blocks. I need to eat 2 Cliff Blocks. And I need to stick 2 in my cheeks like a little squirrel and suck on them. And suck on them for 5 minutes and then chew them. That's a great strategy, actually. Or I need to just start drinking some of this sports drink, whatever you like. So absolutely. I mean, that is a big thing you can do right there while you're racing.
And so kind of along those same lines, you talk about a glucose performance zone and kind of like dialing in what your numbers are. And again, this is something that might change from season to season or from race to race. And so will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of us have these, we have what we call, somebody give me a couple definitions. Number one, basal, basically what is called your basal glucose number is what you wake up with. Okay. So I wake up in the morning, my number is 89. That's my basal rate by definition. Then when I talk about it with athletes, I say, kind of just your daily basal rate. Okay. What is my daily number? That may be 100, 105, maybe 95, whatever that is. So that's our daily basal rate. Then you have what we call the glucose performance zones, the GPZs. These are where you perform really well and your glucose is in this range. Now, this is a big range. This is not like a power meter where, okay, my FTP is between, 91 and 106% of my FTP, and I'm going to ride right here at 100% of my FTP, etc. We're holding a very narrow range. For glucose, it could be from 120 up to 160. Okay. And that's a big range because you might need to take in not very much to get to 120, but you may need to take in a lot of carbs to get to 160. But in that range, somewhere where you're going to find, and I have some tests in my book that you can do to do this, that you will perform the best. And so a couple of things occur. Number one, you'll feel like you have a steady supply of energy. Okay. You're not going to be like, oh man, I was feeling great. Now I'm not feeling great. What happened in this race? Because we're doing long events. Two, your mental attitude is going to be much more positive.
Definitely been there.
Right? We've all been there, right? All of us. And it's just like, oof, why am I doing this? I don't, and blah, blah, right? You get down on yourself. But you know what? The first time you start to get down on yourself, you should look at your glucose meter because it probably means your glucose is dropping. Like that is a really key factor. Like all of a sudden, like your mental attitude changes or you start to get bummed out or you're not riding well or something's going on. Like, man, I better look at my glucose right now. You're like, I'll be darned. Exactly right. That thing has just dropped 20 milligrams per deciliter. I need to eat.
Well, I think the medical term for that is hangry.
Hangry. It happens in life too, right? I mean,
exactly.
Work on training schedules, blah, blah, blah. You're just like, oh, man, I don't want this athlete really being a pain in my butt, and then you're like, well, I better look at my glucose. Oh, I better eat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've never attributed it to like in a race, but right. Absolutely. Yeah. And so with that, I guess I kind of have two other questions for you here. One, everybody's pushing super high carbs at this point. And right. There's some research coming out now showing that like a lot of people can only oxidize. Even if you can consume 120 grams of carbs, they're still oxidizing like 60. Is there, in your experience, have you been able to see like consumption versus utilization with right. the glucose monitor?
Right. That's another really interesting topic. And I think that here's what I found. I have found, and I would love, and this is where I haven't seen it, and I would assume that they have it in these studies, but I haven't seen it yet, where they put these athletes on CGMs to see what their glucose was when they were taking in 120 grams of carbs, because that's what I would love to know. Like, what is their glucose when they're taking it in? What I found with the 50 athletes that I've worked with is that I only had one athlete out of 50 that performed better when their glucose was over 180. Okay. Everybody else was basically kind of in that 100 to 180 range. That's a big wide range, but in somewhere in that range, maybe they were 140 to 160, maybe they were 110 to 130, but somewhere in that range, they perform really well. Anybody outside of that range above 180, it's not like they rode faster, right? They didn't have a better power output. They didn't win the race, because their glucose was 200. And so I'm very skeptical of that. And your body it wants to maintain a state of homeostasis, right?
Right.
It's like, I want to be here, right? This is where I want to be. I want to be here. You're putting me to 200. it's going to do everything it can to get back to here, right? So if you're constantly driving it to 200, it's like now you're almost having to overwork yourself to keep it there. Okay. So you got to take in like 120 grams of carbs, right? You're just constantly eating all the time. Like this is a lot of work, blah blah. The other factor that we have to take into consideration is that almost all these studies, and maybe they're all are, don't quote me on that, but the ones I've seen are all done on super elite professional athletes. Um, you know, you have to, in order to burn 1,000 calories an hour, you have to do 300 watts.
Exactly. That's been my experience too. A lot of my, maybe with you too, like a lot of my masters athletes, their threshold might be like 220, 250, right? And so they're burning 500 to 700 calories per hour. And it's like, do you need to take in 500 calories per hour? Probably not.
No, exactly. Exactly, right? So that's the thing, right? I mean, okay, gosh, if you're Toddy Pagacha and your FTP is 460 and you're burning 1,400 calories an hour, okay, maybe you need to take in 120 grams of carbs an hour.
Right.
Because you are burning it. Whereas the rest of us, I mean, there's really good science around, 60 grams is kind of the maximum that you can oxidize of glucose. And then if you put fructose as well with that, you can do another 16 grams to get yourself to 76 grams of carbohydrates an hour. And that's a really good science around that.
Right.
Pretty much everybody can do that. So I think that's my recommendation for all my athletes. Like 60 to 80, nail that. That's really good.
Okay. Last question I have for you is, we're coming up on the holidays. This might not go out till after Thanksgiving, but it's like everybody's mind. I mean, all cyclists want to be lighter, right?
Right.
And so weight loss always starts to become a thing. And so can you use the CGM to help maybe not lose weight, but to like manage your weight by seeing how it responds with the carbohydrates and things like that?
Yeah. Man, you got some great questions. This is awesome. No, seriously, these are awesome. I've done a bunch of podcasts now, and these are really, really good ones. And these are really important questions to answer. All right, so let's talk about nighttime and evening meals. All right, so when we're thinking about our evening meals, number one, we need to eat early. Okay. Don't eat at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and then go to bed, at within 30 minutes of eating, right? Or that, right? Let's eat at 6 o'clock at night, and even, for an endurance athlete, you should probably kind of deprioritize carbs a little bit here. Okay. So, okay, now if you had a low carb meal for whatever reason for lunch, and then you went and rode for 2.5 hours and did intervals and stuff, okay, you need carbs then, okay, for dinner, all right? But in general, okay, you probably ought to kind of back off a little bit of the carbs. Again, have good healthy proteins and good vegetables and some good healthy fats, some nuts, avocados, things like this. And that way your glucose level is relatively stable at that kind of that daily just cruising number when you go to sleep. Okay, because when you take in a ton of carbohydrates, again, the pancreas releases that insulin and says, oh man, we need to get this into our cells, or we need to use it. And your cells are already full, right? They're full. Everybody's full. It's like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? Well, he's not doing any exercise. What's going to happen? We're just going to keep circulating this in here. And then what happens? Body says, oh, we're not using this glucose. Let's store it as fat.
Right.
Your body doesn't really like doing this, to be honest. It actually is really difficult. Not really difficult, but it is energy. It takes energy to store energy, and so it doesn't like doing this. But at the same time, it says we should just store this as fat. Okay, so man, I just had that big old thing of Haagen-Dazs. Boom, glucose goes to 200. Insulin comes in. Boom, all your cells are full, and now your glucose is just kind of circulating. Oh, let's just store this as fat because you're going to sleep, and so all night long, now your glucose is just getting stored as fat. It's starting at 200, and it's coming down, coming down, coming down. You look at your CGM in the morning, and you're like, oh man, just an hour ago, I got up at 6:30. At 5:30, my glucose got back to 90. So you were storing fat all night long. So that's that's not the answer.
I feel attacked.
All right.
No,
so better solution, Dave. Better solution, right? Is let's say, okay, gosh, one, let's stack our food. Like, let's make sure we get the right amount of carbohydrates, and let's eat a little earlier. And then that way, like, cool, my glucose is 120 or something, or 110 or 115, whatever it is. I'm going to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, 10:30, whatever it is. And then it just kind of cruises down and stabilizes, and it's just a flat line all night. That's when you want a flat line, right? The nighttime glucose is when you really want a flat line. And I guess this is really an important point, right? And I've had a lot of athletes ask me about this, and they say, "Oh man, my HbA1c is high, and it came back high. The doctor says I'm borderline diabetic, and I'm like super fit, and this is crazy. How can this possibly be?" Well, HbA1c measures how glycated, how much sugar is on the red blood cell, and as athletes, this is essentially basically looking at the CTL, the chronic training load of the sugar molecule in your red blood cell over the last 3 months. Okay, so it's basically exactly the same.
Yeah.
And what it does is you can look at it and say, well, gosh, my average glucose was 120 or 130 throughout most of the time, except for when I was asleep, because I'm training a lot. I'm eating a lot of food. I'm training a lot. And so all of us, our glucoses are higher as an average because we're athletes. We're not just sitting around. We're using it. Back to that transitory idea of it coming in and going out, coming in and going out. So for us, the better measurement of do you have pre-diabetes or not, blah, blah, is take your average of your nighttime glucose. Like, I went to bed here and I woke up here. What was my average? And then there's a calculator online that you can put that number in. Let's say it's 90. And it converts it into a HbA1c number. All right. And that's really what your HbA1c truly is.
Oh, interesting.
As an athlete, okay? As an athlete. All right. I wouldn't just take the general population and say that, but that's a more important number that we need to be looking at.
Awesome. Well, very cool. I think I've learned a lot, and I think everybody else will learn a lot if they pick up your book. Where can people find you?
Yeah, training and competing with the CGM.com. So check that out. I've got blog posts on there. And then I'm also teaching a master class as well. I've got a master class just for athletes. And then I have a whole nother curriculum just for coaches as well. So it's an 8-module master class with all kinds of really good information that I go into depth even deeper into this and explain other concepts that just didn't quite make it in the book. So, and use this as a great platform if you really want to learn even more.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to include the links to that. And like I said, I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing to use it and learn more about myself and maybe kick that Ben and Jerry habit.
Awesome, man. Well, I know you got it. Thanks so much for having me on, Dave. This is so cool.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care.